What's going on, everybody? Welcome to After Prison Show, and boy, oh boy, does it feel good to be back. Haven't been in the captain's chair for a little while. I was out of town. I'm back now, and one really awesome thing to mention about being back in the captain's chair is the construction outside. It's damn near done. I mean, they're still out there, but it doesn't really seem like they're doing all that much, and there's no noise today. Today is actually the first quiet day that we've had, where I can actually sit in this chair and film this video that I really want to share with all of you. Folks, today I want to share with you a video about making money in prison and when that goes wrong. You know, when you think about serving time, pretty much anything can become a prison hustle. If you got that business savvy, street sense mentality, I mean, you can basically turn anything in prison into a hustle. But not everything that can be a prison hustle is always a good thing. And sometimes people can end up getting burned or gotten. You got. And it's today that I'm going to share with you guys some prison stories about just that. These stories that I was actually reminded of because of this one particular prison-related news story that I just ran across that is absolutely crazy. So, it's with all that being mentioned, and what do you say we go ahead and do? Damn, that hurt. Head first into this video. Boy, I hit the Gran Turismo with that dive scene right there. Prison hustles, or prison scams, or making money in prison and that going wrong. Like I said at the beginning of this video, you know, when you serve time, a lot of things can be used as a prison hustle. Far outside of gambling or tattooing or artwork or stealing things from the kitchen. You know, getting guys prison pen pals can be a hustle. That was actually one of my prison hustles while locked up. But there's also things like making phone calls for other prisoners. Three-way calls, something that they really don't want you to be able to do, and something that in a lot of cases they really tried to prevent. But where there's a will, there's a way, and there's usually always a way to be able to make a three-way call. And what a three-way call entails is where one prisoner who is able to use the phone because he's got money on the phone and got someone who is going to pick up that phone, punches in their inmate number, calls whoever it is that they call, and then they're able to get that person on the other end of the line to click over, dial another number, connect the calls, merge them together, basically having a conference call, three-way call, and that's something that prisoners are able to sell to other prisoners from $1 to $2, $5, maybe even more dollars per call. And trust me, there's gonna be plenty of prisoners who want to buy those phone calls because they want to call that girl who ain't got no money on the phone and who ain't picked up and ask her, yeah, it's me. You know it's me. I got my homeboy to make this three-way call right here. Why ain't you been picking up the phone and there ain't no money on it? Why does it sound like you at the club right now? You at the club right now? You is not at the club right now. You at the club full of Jodies right now. I've seen plenty of three-way calls go wrong, and yet still, there's plenty of prisoners who are willing to pay just in an effort to be able to make that call. But even worse than paying for that three-way call, calling home, finding out that your girl's at the club full of Jodies, is this story about this one particular prisoner who had a best friend in prison, a prison BFF. These dudes were really tight, really good friends. And not only would the one guy who was able to get on the phone, call home to his girl, make the three-way calls for his friend, he would also become so tight with this guy that he would actually just give this dude his inmate PIN number, basically like your social security number in prison, something that you never give away. He would give his friend his inmate PIN number and allow his friend, hey, you just go call my girl, punch in my PIN number, you can call my girl and get her to call whoever you want. And folks, when I tell you that this was the worst mistake this guy ever made, oh my God. I'm not exactly sure if best friend number one was charging best friend number two for these phone calls, especially after he gave him his inmate PIN number and just let him go make the phone calls by himself. But I do know that best friend number one, who did have access to the phone, who did have that girl out there who had yet to find Jody, because pretty much every girl will find Jody eventually, he was charging other prisoners for these three-way calls. But moving on, eventually best friend number two would end up getting in some trouble. And I don't remember exactly what he did, but I do remember that he got in enough trouble to not only get taken to the hole, taken out of the housing unit, but they ended up shipping him off to another prison. And you know, a crazy thing about serving time in prison and having friends in prison, you know, you'll have some of the closest friends that you'll ever have in your life while serving time together. But then anytime that you end up getting broken up from that friendship where one person gets moved or one person goes to the hole or somebody gets transferred, you know, that relationship usually isn't as strong as it once was. And that would be exactly the case in this particular story. Because when best friend number two ended up getting transferred, it wouldn't be long before best friend number one was calling home to his girl and finding out that best friend number 2 was still calling from another prison. And this wasn't really sitting too well with best friend number 1. I remember hearing arguments between him and his girl. How could you? How are you gonna answer the phone for him? But you ain't gonna answer the phone for me though. You my girl. You my girl. That's my friend though. He ain't gonna be Jody. He locked up. You can't be Jody if you locked up. That doesn't make any sense though. And you know, eventually the arguments would become a lot less between this guy and his girlfriend. And the reason for that was because the phone calls would end up becoming a lot less as well. And eventually what would end up happening is that girl was no longer answering the phone for her man, but instead it must have been that she was now dealing solely and strictly and in a relationship with best friend number 2, where it all began with giving this guy the inmate PIN number, aka your prison social security, and allowing this guy who he considered his friend to call home to his girlfriend. And now sitting at another prison was best friend number 2, aka Jody in prison. Something that you very rarely see, but you will see it. And when I tell you that when this realization finally hit best friend number 1, who was no longer a best friend at all, that his girl had left him for his homeboy, who was in prison with him, who he was allowing to call home to her. Not only was this dude heartbroken, he was feeling pretty dumb as well. So, you know, that's one prison hustle gone wrong right there, or making money in prison gone wrong, that I wanted to share with you that I know of personally. The other ones that I want to share with you, I don't really have stories for them, but these are things that I had heard through the prison grapevine, aka inmate.com. Because in prison, there is certainly a lot of gossip that takes place. And these particular hustles or scams or making money gone wrong scenarios are things that I had heard about, but I never saw these personally. And folks, these are absolutely crazy. You know, I've heard of dudes getting over on other prisoners where they're able to get that prisoner's social security number, their real one, not their prison ID number. And they're able to get somebody on the outside to apply for a credit card in that prisoner's name. You know, not all prisoners got bad credit. And I've also heard of prisoners going as far as filing fraudulent tax returns using another prisoner's social security number as well. Now, again, I never saw this actually take place, but I definitely heard about this. And I can imagine, like, the first thing that you're thinking is, you know, how is a prisoner going to get access to another prisoner's social security number? Well, let me just throw out this one particular scenario, and this is actually something that I heard accompanied some of what I was just telling you about right there with the credit cards and the tax return. And that is another hustle in prison involving doing legal work for other prisoners. You know, some prisoners are actually what is referred to as like a jailhouse lawyer. And some of these guys actually study the law for years. They know cases. They know how to write up legal paperwork and file appeals. And that's something they can charge other prisoners and charge a hefty penny to be able to do so, filing legal work, filing appeals, and anything else involving prisoners' cases. And it was this one particular story that I had heard about involving this jailhouse lawyer filing paperwork or court documents for this other prisoner who was able to get from that other prisoner his social security number as well. I mean, think about it. If you're gonna trust a prisoner, a jailhouse lawyer, with all of your court paperwork, why wouldn't you trust them with your social security number as well? Some prisoners might actually trust and believe that they've gotta give those bogus lawyers their social security number as well. But it's with all that I've mentioned thus far, these crazy prison scams or hustles or ways to make money in prison, that bring us to this absolutely insane prison-related news story about exactly all of this right here. Folks, I ran across this story in the news with a headline saying this woman didn't let prison get in the way of a good scam. When I ran across this, I absolutely had to learn more. And folks, when I tell you that you're going to be quite intrigued and probably also shocked by what this woman was doing, I'm pretty sure you will be. This story takes place down in Texas involving a woman named Alexis Norman, who didn't let prison get in the way of a good scam. A Midlothian woman, I think is the right way to pronounce that, was sentenced in 2016 to nearly 9 years in federal prison for stealing the identity of counselors to bill the government millions for psychotherapy sessions with children that never happened. Well, this chick was a genius. This chick sounds like the female version of Bernie Madoff. And so again, in 2016, this woman right here, Alexis Norman, look at this gem. She was sentenced to 9 years in prison for basically embezzlement. Now, as if all of that isn't crazy enough, folks, this story only gets better. And it also poses a really interesting question as well. You know, you think about getting locked up, going to prison, and You would imagine that when getting there, you would want to try to like change your ways. You know what? I just got sentenced to 9 years in prison for embezzlement or this pretty much genius plan. And even though I was making millions, I might want to consider trying to change my ways. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. You think that that's what this woman was thinking about? Do you think she was thinking about changing her ways? If you answered that no, you're absolutely right. Because it was while in prison that this female version of Bernie Madoff would only further her criminal empire. The story goes on to say, but even before she started serving her sentence, Norman, who was 48 years old, went back to work with the exact same Medicaid billing scam. You ain't learned your lesson at all. You wasn't worried about them 9 years at all. You was gonna make sure you definitely kept your books full up. You kept that foot lock on your wall lock or whatever kind of lock you got full of the zoom zooms and wham whams. Oh, Alexis Norman. Crime doesn't pay. But in this case, it actually paid pretty well. While behind bars in Fort Worth for the first fraud, Norman used the prison email and phone system, in-person visits, and secret codes to pass on information to a friend and accomplice for the second fraud, court records say. And you know, this chick also wasn't worried about the fact that them emails, phone calls, all of that's recorded. And as far as those in-person visits, you know, I've actually heard something that might actually be a prison myth. I'm not entirely sure. But it does make sense. You know, there was rumors spread through inmate.com that the prisons were bugged, that there were actually listening devices placed all over the prison. And nobody ever really knew where those devices were, nor did they ever really know if that was for real or not. But just the thought alone, hearing that rumor get spread around the prison, was enough for you to really question where and what you were talking about while serving time. This woman, Alexis Norman, would end up getting sentenced to an additional 30 years in prison for the second fraud that she perpetrated. And they say that this is a lengthy sentence for a white-collar financial scheme. Her attorney even suggested that this could be considered cruel and unusual punishment, but the prosecutor would say that Miss Norman is a brazen fraudster. Whew. Hey, what you in here for? They called me a brazen fraudster. You might want to get that tattooed across your stomach. Brazen fraudster. They would also go on to say that she's the one who put herself in this position. No one else did. Her letters from behind bars while serving time for the first crime contained a series of tasks, such as how much money in Medicaid claims to submit. The friend Karen Jones would wear red when visiting her to indicate the claims were paid. Norman also slipped notes to Jones during her weekly prison visits, sometimes from her shoe, with the details about providers and Medicaid beneficiaries, court records say. You want to talk about a scam? This chick was operating a Ponzi scheme from prison. I ain't never heard it. I mean, as bad as this is horrible. I don't condone any type of illegal activities. But to think about the brazenness, as the prosecutor called this woman, of all of this, and the fact that she was probably making buku money from behind bars, this is insane. Norman also helped two other business owners with separate fraudulent billing schemes. One was similar to her own Medicaid billing scam. The other involved a government program that provided meals to children in low-income areas during the summer. Oh, you ain't got no heart at all. You're gonna take from some hungry kids. I can see why they gave you 30 years. Norman pled guilty last year to 1 count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and 4 counts of healthcare fraud. As a part of her plea deal, prosecutors agreed not to charge her with fraud related to the school meal program. They definitely ain't offer you no type of a good deal at all. But then again, I got no idea how much that particular fraud case right there would carry. Try walking up into a courtroom with a charge involving stealing money from hungry kids. They're probably gonna smoke your boots. Interestingly enough about all of this woman, Alexis Norman, would actually appeal for a second chance at life to give herself the opportunity to rise from the failure I have become. And you know, I wanna ask you all this as well. You think this chick deserves a second chance? You know, some people don't learn the first time. And it's crazy to think that, who knows, maybe these were the only 2 times this chick ever got in trouble in her life, and now she's doing damn near 40 years up in prison. Do you think that she deserves less time, more time, or even a second chance at life? Alexis Norman said that she's filled with remorse. Her commissary box is probably filled up as well, and has found God. She apologized to her family for lying during her previous sentencing hearing and said that her family is doing this time with her. Very crazy, folks. So even though, like we said earlier in this, you know, this crime did pay, In the end, it most certainly did not. And with all of that, I could not think of a better story to accompany the headline, the title of this video, Making Money in Prison Gone Wrong, than this particular one right here. Hey, look, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did so, please leave a like and a comment letting me know exactly what you thought about it. As always, until next time, enjoy life, the free world. Never take a moment for granted, and make the most of every day. Peace!